He's joining us from Ghana. So we have representations across the regions, and we will launch the work that we're doing across regions a little later. But we will start off with maybe Rangita, if you could give an overview of the work that you do on migration and how climate-induced migration plays a role, and then we can move to the other speakers.
Hi, everybody, and I hope you all hear me well. So wish you all a very happy International Migrants Day today. So with that, I wish to start ahead with International Organization for Migration's portfolio in working with environmental migration. Now, when it comes to environmental migration, it's a very interesting area because most of us might not know that if we are migrating from one place to the other internally, that probably our factors that had actually led us to migrate in that way had been certain climate change based impact or maybe situations or factors. Now, in that sense, IOM is one of the leading organizations, and it's an intergovernmental organization because we're part of the United Nations. And we had been working as the Full Frontier Operational Agency to support these sort of environmental migrants. Based on that, we actually work like in the heart of international, regional, and by looking at national concerns in collaboration with all our member states, observers, and partners. Now, if you look at our objectives, mainly we work in the migration cycle by kind of trying to minimize forced and unmanaged migration as much as possible. So until we get proper solutions. And also where forced migration does occur, to ensure assistance and protection for those affected people and to seek durable solutions. Meanwhile, we try to facilitate the role of migration as an adaptation strategy because we know that we cannot run away from climate change. We have to be more resilient. So we try to provide adaptation strategy to climate change. However, it is a bit difficult. Still, we try our level best. Now, when it comes to Sri Lanka, in Sri Lanka, we have a project running right now. There are two objectives. One is to advocate, to provide awareness to Sri Lankan communities on community resilient living or livelihood building. Then to work with the government to provide some sort of a roadmap in that particular sense by conducting an in-depth country assessment through a research. We want to find some evidence because it will be one of the signature researchers that we're conducting. Meanwhile, we are trying to integrate some sort of families which we come across probably after the research. We might find out what are the key areas that are being identified as climate hotspots. So we will be providing some assistance to those vulnerable population. So that's it from IOM. Thank you. Over to you, Wasika.
Rangita, and also welcome to everyone who's joining us today from the Global Youth Forum. We have a lot of participants who've signed in. So good morning again, and good evening or good afternoon, wherever you're joining us again from. And I will pass the mic now to Dennis, because the purpose of this session is to also launch the work that we're doing globally on climate change and climate migration. So Dennis will speak a bit on that and also the work that we're doing in Sri Lanka on this topic.
Yes, thank you very much. And also good afternoon, evening, morning, or whichever time it is to everyone on the call and listening on Facebook. Let me just quickly share this. Okay, so our work is SLYCAN Trust. So I'm Director of Research and Education at SLYCAN Trust, and we have been working on climate change and human mobility, including climate migration, displacement, and like trapped populations and a number of issues surrounding this for a while, focusing first on Sri Lanka. where basically, like this is just a quick overview of the different mobility patterns and dynamics that are connected to climate change in Sri Lanka. I won't go into detail on this now, but basically climate change impacts are either sudden onset or slow onset. There are long-term impacts and sudden ones, including droughts and floods and things like soil degradation, sea level rise. And they can lead to disaster displacement, to permanent internal migration, to economic migration. For example, in off seasons, a lot of farming communities have cyclical migration where farmers go to cities to work. Foreign employment is there, and there's also the options to rural development and adaptation measures to increase resilience and decrease these impacts that lead to migration. So, and migration and human mobility and climate change are connected with a number of different sectors, from everything that's obvious, like climate change and disaster management, or labor rights and labor laws, to things that might not be as obvious, for example, education, health, social cohesion, ecosystem services. And for our research, we have at the moment 2 knowledge products that are already published and 1 more that is going to be launched today. First off, we have a case study we published on climate displacement and internal migration in Sri Lanka, focused on Trincomalee district, where we did ground level research on this. Then we have a policy brief on the policies, laws, and processes in Sri Lanka. And what we're launching today, a working paper on impact and actions across sectors, which is focusing on 4 different sectors. First of all, the case study, you can download this in our Knowledge Hub. I will share the link in the chat. Focuses on the situation in Trincomalee district, which is in in northeastern Sri Lanka. It's an agricultural, like a largely agricultural district, and we did a survey across several villages there and analyzed the findings in terms of what are the reasons for migration, who is migrating, where they're migrating to, and what are the climate impacts they're experiencing, what happens to the people staying behind, mostly the women, and like all these questions surrounding this. So I invite you to have a look at this. Then more recently, this year, we have published a policy brief on the policies, laws, and processes that connect to migration and to human mobility in a larger sense. You can download this as well on our Knowledge Hub. And it goes into detail on how the different climate commitments, how the SDGs, the development process, how the different sectoral laws in the health sector, in labor sector, in the environment and climate sector, how they all connect to human mobility, or where the gaps and needs are. And also how this can connect to international processes, especially the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage, which is included also in the commitments that Sri Lanka has committed under the Paris Agreement, the so-called nationally determined contributions, which commit to establishing a national mechanism under the Warsaw International Mechanism. And this has a work stream on climate mobility and also a task force on displacement under this. So this connects directly to the policies and laws that are being introduced in countries. And today, just uploaded on the Knowledge Hub as well, is our working paper on impacts and actions across sectors. So a bit of backstory on that. We had a workshop, a national stakeholder workshop with, together with IOM Sri Lanka and the Maldives in September. And we had a lot of people from different sectors attending to basically find out how they in their sectors are dealing with climate change and mobility, how these sectors connect to this, and how this can be addressed also in different ways through policies and actions in these sectors. And the working paper takes input from this workshop combined with our ongoing ground research and the desk research, and focuses on 4 sectors: water resources and irrigation, ecosystems and biodiversity, human health, and then the cross-cutting issues of vulnerable communities and gender. To really go into a bit more detail and open up these fields of questions about how water resources influence decisions to migrate, how water scarcity and climate impacts increase the pressure for migration, and how they can be addressed also, how ecosystems and biodiversity and loss of ecosystem services connect, and also human health and then these cost-cutting issues. So you can download this right now on our Knowledge Hub. I'll share the link in the chat. Actually, I can show it here also. And that is our work in Sri Lanka at the moment. And we have now started work in 2 other countries as well, together with our country partners and also the governments. And this is our Knowledge Hub. If you go there and scroll down, you can see right there the working paper, and down below there are more information materials on this and also on the other fields of work we have. So we are working in Ghana and Niger to understand climate migration and the policy level, and finding potential entry points to address these challenges in these countries. So we'll be publishing more on that in the near future. So research at the moment is ongoing. Our country partners are doing data collection and consultations inside the country, and we are providing technical support for that and analyzing the policies and laws that are there. So thank you very much. If there are any questions, I think we can ask them at the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dennis. I think we will have a contribution from the country partners shortly as well. Before we go to that, now we have Professor Christina Voigt joining us. Christina, if you could quickly do a sound check, just say hello. Yes.
Hello, Vasita.
Yes, I will pass the mic to you and let you introduce yourself as well. Great to see you again. Yes.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. A warm hello from Oslo. Well, not so warm, actually, because it's quite cold here. I do apologize for being a little late. There was a time confusion. I think we all struggle these days with Zoom meetings. But I would like to thank you, Vasita, very, very much for inviting me. And I congratulate you to that series of different webinars, but especially this one on climate change and migration. Now, I did miss the opening remarks, I guess, by you and by Dennis. I just heard the last bit of it. So if I, in my remarks, say something that was already said, I apologize for that. We all know that limiting global warming to well below 2 degrees centigrade compared to pre-industrial levels will increase the likelihood of climate impacts compared to limiting it to 1.5 degrees. And that's basically the reason why we have the recognition of 1.5 degrees in the Paris Agreement's Article 2. But the higher we get in terms of warming, the higher and more intense the impacts are. And these are singular impacts like floods and droughts and increased weather events, freshwater and food impacts. But it is in particular the accumulation of all of these events. And here we don't really have the accurate science, what all these impacts together mean in terms of stresses to natural and human systems. So in addition to those singular impacts, we have indirect impacts that interface, that interact and intensify already existing pressures. For example, poverty, conflict, unrest, resource shortages, losses of livelihood, stresses on livelihoods, infrastructure breakdown, social discrimination, relocation, and eventually migration, because people will feel those stresses and will feel inclined to leave the areas where they are established. And I guess that is what Dennis was talking about just right before me. Much of the migrational movement will be internal within a country from one area to another, where it may be safer or more secure to re-establish and resettle. And that links back to domestic and national and local initiatives that Dennis was just explaining. So there's going to be an expectation of climate change raising the amount, the magnitude of internal displacement. But there will also be millions of people, and there's no correct number, and it also depends on what kind of warming we will see in the next decade, that will cross international boundaries. And that will influence migration, international migration patterns. So it's both the number, but also the patterns of international migration, migration that crosses international boundaries, that is about to change in the very near future. Now, we know that current legal systems that protect international migrants do not work particularly well. We do know that from a European perspective, we see it in the Asian Pacific region, where it is actually better than, I guess, in Europe. But the current laws, the current protective regimes that are aimed at protecting international migrants are limited, and are limited in their effectiveness and in their scope. We have, for example, on the international level, the number of non-binding frameworks, which are good to have, but that's what they are. They're not legally binding. For example, the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. We have the Global Compact for migration, which actually refers to environmental migration, and that includes also migration due to climate change impacts. But as I said, these are very important instruments to have, but they're not legally binding. Now, when it comes to binding international obligations, we really only have the 1952 Refugee Convention, and I assume you may have talked about it, which has a very narrow definition of who is a refugee, and not everyone who is forced or feels to leave their home country due to the increased impacts on climate change wants to be recognized as a refugee, because it's a status that has a particular standing, and it's not necessarily something that is fitting to the context of climate change. But nevertheless, if we do look at the 1952 Refugee Convention, we are confronted with a situation that it was designed in the aftermath of the Second World War, and it talks about the necessity to leave the country. Sorry, that was the alarm for this meeting, which I thought started at 9:30. Sorry for that interruption. Which talks about the protection of people that are forced to leave their country because of a fear of persecution. And then they have to belong to one of those 5 categories that are mentioned in the 51 Convention, which is race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. And we know that this does not fit particularly well to the aspect of people that have to leave or leave their country due to the impacts of climate change and the enhanced impact on their well-being and their livelihoods. So the concept of climate refugee is something that is currently under a discourse, and it's an extremely important discourse to be had, because the protection of their country that cross international boundary, the legal protection is going to be crucially important. We have seen some interesting developments by the Human Rights Committee. As you perhaps know, it had to deal with a petition by an individual from Kiribati, a small island developing states in the South Pacific, Mr. Chiota, who moved from Kiribati to New Zealand, and he claimed refugee status in New Zealand to be recognized and protected in New Zealand, and that was rejected by the New Zealand authorities. He went to court, it was rejected by the courts in New Zealand, and he took his case to the Human Rights Committee under the United Nations. And that committee, although not recognizing the claim by Mr. Chiota from Kiribati, did open the door at least a little bit to recognize that in these situations where there is an immediate risk to life and livelihood due to the impacts of climate change, that could be recognized at least as something that is similar to persecution, or could be understood as something that is a fear of persecution, even if there is no personal or human agent in that aspect of persecution. The Human Rights Committee went so far to recognize that the customary principle of non-refoulement may apply to people that leave their home countries due to the climate change impacts, and even in the future may be something that is recognizable under the 1952 Convention. Now, although this is like an evolutionary interpretation in the absence of a legal recognition of climate refugee under international law, it gives an indication about the importance of this debate and where it's being headed, and also recognition that we are currently missing that legal protection under international law. Now, Dennis spoke already about the Paris Agreement, and where in Article 8 about loss and damage, it recognizes the migratory flows of people and the Warsaw Mechanism for loss of damages, which is linked to the Paris Agreement through Article 8. And it's still something that is a tool for implementation. It's still being negotiated. The particular rules and how it will be functioning in the future is something that is constantly evolving, while we see constantly changing numbers of people that are forced to leave their home countries or even their home areas and move around domestically. Now, I just want to finish with a general call to people who work on international governance and law in this field to think about what are our ways, what are our tools, our possibilities to strengthen the protection of people that leave their home countries, that cross international boundaries. It is refugee law. It is not only refugee law, it's also human rights law at its core, which needs to be applied to those people that currently have very, very little protection. And I think that's a call to each and every one of us to use the knowledge and the expertise we have on that very important task. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christina. Sorry about the confusion on time, but I think I needed to give you a brief introduction. I need to give that introduction because I missed out on introducing you. So Christina is very involved in the UNFCCC negotiations. For those who are following negotiations, she's not a new face. She leads negotiations on compliance, and she's also the co-chair of Article 15 Committee on Compliance, promoting and facilitating compliance. So I just say the whole thing. So thank you for joining us. We'll quickly pass to the other interventions and come to you before you have to leave, hopefully. So can we go to now Niger? I think Sani is joining us. Sani, over to you.
Hello? Is it my turn?
We can hear you, Sani.
Yes, Sani, we can hear you.
Yes, thank you for having me here. Also, to invite Jeune Volontaire pour l'Environnement here in Niger. I want also to wish a good celebration of the International Migration Day. So, because this is Niger is part of the countries that play a key role in terms of migration. It's concerned economic migration or environmental migration. Our position, the head of the Sahel, can allow us to play a kind of key role, from people coming from some West African countries to go to have the desert, the coast desert for the Sahara in Europe. And so, but today, if we have to talk about the migration, the Niger context, it's very important to know that the majority of the population here in Niger live in rural areas. So that means that all the livelihoods are based on the environmental, and we are in Sahel, and the Sahel is very impacted about the climate change issue. And if we have to tell the main environmental problems here in Niger, the first is that we have drought. As part of the Sahel country, we have this drought issue. We have soil degradation, the sinking of Lake Chad, because Lake Chad is a kind of the lake that we share with Chad, Nigeria and Niger also. We have the river, the Niger River also have a main problem in terms of environmental problem. And we have this issue of deforestation because, you know, the most wood consumption are coming from the trees, and we have this sand intrusion, a problem that Nigerians suffer from on daily basis, especially, you know, the majority of the population works in farming, cattle herding, and fishing. So that are kind of activities that are highly related to the environment. So it's very important to know. And, you know, the environmental migration is like kind of new area. So for us, there is no good database or lot of information document related to this. So it's like the migration is the widespread phenomenon in Niger, you know, according to the rural poverty. As I told you, that more than 70% of the population are living in rural area. And, you know, and this rural poverty and the food insecurity have accelerated the population migration from the rural area to the cities in the southern part of the country, because the main cities that we have people every year after the 3 months of the rainy season, after the production, they leave their villages and come to the urban area, to the cities. And you can find also some people that can leave also the country to go broader, to go like the country like Libya, Cote d'Ivoire, Benin, to stay like more than 6 months. So this is kind of problem that we have. So if we have to talk about the policy intervention and action that focus on the topic also, it's good to relate that actually for the topic on environmental migration, we don't have specific policies on this, but we have some policies that try to address issues on migration, like recently the one that signed between Niger and European Union is part of migration, but not related directly to environmental migration. But when we see also in terms of security, because you know, Niger is in the middle of West Africa, so we have Nigeria with Boko Haram crisis. We have Mali and also with Acme in West Africa, and also we have Burkina Faso that are facing from some security challenges. So that allows some people to move. And in the country, we have like several refugee camps also. So, but we have some policies that try to, with the UN, that try to, with the country, engage people and protect them. But to be focused on this environmental crisis, we have some, maybe some public policies that can address globally some issues like this, but not specifically on this. So that's why we very welcome this kind of research that we want to conduct with SLYCAN Trust to see how the situation is in Niger, and also how we can help to address some challenges like climate and human mobility, and also how we can have a kind of lobby to our policymaker to address a kind of specifically issue on climate migration or migration as we thought. So Niger is in the process because we host the Sahel Commission of Climate. We host it here in Niger. So Niger is the one that lead all the Sahel Climate Investment Program that gather like more than 18 countries. So it's a kind of opportunities that we can use to address this kind of challenges, and also we can help our countries to develop a kind of good strategies good strategy on the topic. So that's what we want to share today, and we hope that we can have a good finding during the next coming month, and we can be able to share with the people that are involved in this issue. So we can just know related that with the international migration here that try to deal with some issue like the refugee in Lake Chad. And we have also the Red Cross that sometimes try to address because this year we have like a kind of serious flooding. So this allows several people to move in their place, even here in Niamey, that's the main city. Thank you. I will be able to respond to some question or make other comments. So I'm done
Thank you,
now.
Sani.
Thank
That
you.
was very helpful. Yes, we'll have a second intervention from all the contributing speakers coming up. But before I pass to Chibizi, who will be speaking on Ghana, I would like to request Christina, because I know she's supposed to leave in a bit as well, just to check with her about the question that's in the chat box. We'll come back with the same question to Sunny a bit later. Now, I would like to ask Christina whether she could speak on this, because she's the legal expert here, and she could potentially kind of break this down. So Christina, if you're still around, I think you are. Yes. So there's a question about the pastoral communities that move from one place to another. So I think this goes into the indigenous communities discussion as well. So the question is, how do we handle the, I wouldn't say herds, I mean, I would say, how do we handle the pastoral communities who travel across countries, for example, West Africa, without much control and adherence to national climate management protocols. So I would reword this. I would ask, because this is a different context we are talking about. Let's say a pastoral community moving from one country to the other, because that's what they do for their livelihoods. Would this come as a thing for climate migration that we're talking of? If yes, how do we address this? Or if not, where would this be addressed?
That's an interesting question, and quite a difficult one, because pastoral community or communities in especially in West Africa have been moving around for as long as we know, really, as long as history, as long as men have been around. It's not a new phenomenon, but it may be enhanced through to climate change and increased droughts, that these communities move maybe more frequently than usual. But it's probably not something that necessarily would fit within the umbrella of climate refugees, if you want to. But that doesn't mean that they don't need protection. And I've come across this aspect a lot because I worked a lot on forest protection, on REDD+, where the aspect of pastoral communities that historically have been moving around, have been using areas, land areas, forest areas, suddenly was impacted by conservation areas. And that actually brought on the international human climate change negotiations the aspect of indigenous people, local communities' rights, practices, and interests that was for the first time really recognized in the REDD+ context, and then spread over into different areas. But it made it very clear how challenging it is and how important it is that states recognize these local communities, recognize their rights, but also in a regional context, because they move around, and as I said, move around maybe more frequently, migrate more frequently, if you want to call it migration, more frequently than before. But it is a call to regional cooperation, really, and recognition of those communal rights that go back many years, even thousands of years, I would say, but that have not received that legal recognition as they should have. But it's a call to action to the states in the region to get together and recognize that movement. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. I think my colleagues who are on the call from the region could also contribute while we are having the next round of interventions. So now I move to Chibizi, who is joining us from Ghana. Our research in Ghana is done with Chibizi's organization as well as the government of Ghana. So Chibizi, over to you.
All right, thank you, Vosita. I hope I can be heard, right?
Yes, you can be heard.
Okay, so let me proceed whilst I set up my video. Okay, so once again, thank you for this opportunity, and hello to all the cherished participants following us on this conversation. And also I want to add my voice to this year's or today's mark of the International Migration Day, to what my colleague Sani said. Yeah, so in the case of Ghana, we know there are different causes, or the number of causes that leads to migration. But if we want to focus more on climate-induced migration, There are a couple of them. One of them has to do with the loss of livelihood, loss of the source of livelihood, because when people are not able to get a source of livelihood, or what gives them food or daily bread is not forthcoming, then they are forced to migrate to seek for greener pastures elsewhere. So particularly in the northern part of Ghana, we've seen some mass exodus or influx of young people from the north to the southern part, all in search of job, because what they were doing was not giving them the kind of livelihood that they depend on over the years. The other difficulty or cause is the issue of food insecurity. Over the years, we have our farmers who virtually depend on the rainfall, for their farm, and they sow in anticipation of the rains. So when the rains are not forthcoming, it affects the produce, that they can plan for. So when that happens, again, it affects them, and therefore they are also forced to move to other parts, of the country for to survive, as the case may be. The other difficulty or the other cause is the issue of loss of natural resources. We've mentioned drought already. We've seen water bodies drying up. So if you have a whole community that depends on rivers, that depends on water bodies, now not able to access those water bodies because they are increasingly drying up, then that becomes a source of worry for them, and then therefore they are forced to migrate. So all these causes are as a result of the climate change impact on people in poor and rural communities. But fortunately, our government of Ghana, which was led by our Ministry of Interior in April 2016, came out with the National Migration Policy to help address some of these issues. And the migration policy, is quite comprehensive. It tackles a number of issues. It looks at internal migration, voluntary migration, internally displaced persons, irregular migration, human trafficking, different forms of migration. And again, importantly, also the migration also takes into consideration, or the policy takes into consideration, the environment and climate change migration. And the policy actually provides some interventions in addressing migration as far as environment and climate change is concerned. So one of the strategies that the policy seeks to do is to, one, mainstream migration into our national development planning, including the implementation of our national climate change policy, which was launched in 2013, and also our national urban policy. So there's a conscious effort to mainstream migration into our environmental policies. Secondly, also, there's also the document or the policy also seeks to enhance the capacity, of stakeholders to manage migration, environment, climate change, because it's cross-sectorial. So we have different sectors that are being considered, different agencies that are being considered to have their capacity enhanced or built, so they can also see how best to ensure that they are able to mainstream migration in their policies, to ensure that we're able to, curtail or arrest the impact of migration as a result of climate change or environmental issues. Again, the policy talks about the need to increase research and data gathering, because we need data, data to inform policy, to inform intervention. So whatever we do, we're able to track and measure the impact we are making, whether we're making progress or not, even to help us to take corrective action. So there's a provision to ensure that there's enough research and data gathering to track how migration is being caused by environment and climate change. Again, there's the need to create more awareness about the causes and the consequences of migration, environment, climate change, and then to propose some preventive measures. So we have this policy in place, which is currently being implemented, even though, of course, there's still room for improvement. But once you have a policy in place that seeks to address environment and climate change induced migration, at least it gives us hope, it gives us a reason, or it gives us the opportunity to address climate change, to address migration, which is caused by environment or climate change impact. So to touch on the kind of work that we have commenced with SLYCAN Trust in recent times, I want to first of all appreciate SLYCAN Trust for selecting Ghana as one of the countries to embark on this research, how the impact of climate change on migration, displacement. And this project, we are in partnership with the Ministry of Environment, Science and Technology and Innovation in Ghana, who are providing some guidance, in terms of the process in Ghana. And the research comes with a number of benefits. The first benefit I want to talk about is that This research will provide some entry points, to enhance policies. Because even though the migration policy recognizes, the need to ensure that there's stakeholder consultation and that we need to mainstream migration into environmental policies, this research will seek to further enhance the process to provide some guidance or some entry points to support the government to ensure that we consciously mainstream migration in our climate change or environmental issues. Again, this research also seeks to further integrate climate-induced migration into our national planning processes. So the outcome of the research will feed into our national development planning process. So we have key sectors that are responsible for various planning processes. In Ghana, we have the National Development Planning Commission responsible for developing our development agenda or framework. So this process will also help inform the work that they do to enhance and to ensure that we are not leaving out migration as far as our national development agenda is concerned. The other benefits of the research we are working on with SLYCAN Trust is the fact that the outcome of the research will help connect or link to international processes. For example, under the UNFCCC, that is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, particularly under the NDC's review process. As we all know, the Paris Agreement has a provision that countries are able to update or review their NDCs every 5 years. And in Ghana, we are in the process of reviewing our NDCs. It was supposed to have been done this year in November, but due to a number of reasons, it's been postponed to next year. So by the first quarter of 2021, March next year, Ghana, we should have reviewed our NDCs and then submitted to the UNFCCC. So this gives us an opportunity to inform or to also influence the process to see how to ensure that migration is adequately captured in the review of our NDCs. Again, Ghana is also in the process of developing our national adaptation plan. In 2012, we had our national climate change adaptation strategy. And then in 2018, the government of Ghana came out with a national adaptation plan framework. And now we're developing our national adaptation plan through the support of the GCF, Green Climate Fund. We want a readiness support. So for the next 2 years, we are developing an app. And fortunately, also we have a window of opportunity. We are already engaged in a process at the national level, which is currently being implemented or planned by Environmental Protection Agency. So again, we have a window of opportunity to ensure that at least migration features very prominently or strongly in our national adaptation plan processes. And again, like Christina said, she mentioned the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damages. So all these international mechanisms are available. So as a country, we have to demonstrate how we are contributing to the success of all these international mechanisms. So basically, these are some of the expectations or the results we intend to achieve through the research that we are currently embarking on with SLYCAN Trust. So I'll pause here, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to address them. Thank you, Vasita.
I missed out on announcing that GBC is also a Goldman Prize winner this year for 2020 for his climate change work in Ghana. So just for those who would like to know more on that, please check the Goldman Prize updates. Thank you, everyone. We have a very close schedule. So we have 15 minutes more. We have Doha, who will be speaking next. So if you have questions, kindly put the questions into the chat box, and I would ask these in the next round of interventions. And now the screen is yours, Doha.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you, Doha.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for organizing this very important discussion. I mean, a kind of regional and global discussion on climate change induced displacement and migration in relation to causes, consequences, and also the policy instrument we have right now for addressing those. I was listening from Christina in relation to legal aspect for addressing displacement and migration. And I am also a bit, in dilemma whether they will be addressed in proper way or not. In Bangladesh, you know that Bangladesh is cited in many global seminars, discussion, and consultation as a country of climate change induced displacement and migrants, because Bangladesh is a disaster-affected country, disaster-prone country, and the intensity and frequency of disasters are increasing due to impacts of climate change. And the disaster mainly floods, river erosion, cyclone. They are forcing people, thousands of people annually to be displaced and migrated. And many people are saying that the migration is not entirely for climate change impacts. Most of them are economic migrants. This is partly true because the migrants, I mean, who displaced from the coastal communities or from the climate hotspot, they try to adapt to the situation. But when they fail to adapt, they undertake long-term migration, seasonal migration, and to some extent, migration for economic activities. And the collapse of economic activities on the ground, particularly in the climate hotspot, are being triggered by climate change impact. If I cite example from the coastal areas, this is salinity. Salinity is increasing, and salinity is also causing food insecurity, water insecurity, causing health problem to the women and children. And there are also another concern that there are also some social challenges in terms of salinity and also climate change. So such challenges that there are some evidences of early marriage due to salinity intrusion because they consider adolescents or girls as risk. So the family try to transfer the risk to someone else, and this is marriage. So there are many complicated issues are coming up due to climate change, and these are certainly leading to displacement and migration. And displacement and migration is certainly a human rights issue, and because when they migrate from the climate hotspot, they suffer most. When they find their place in urban slum, they also face different kind of discrimination in terms of wage, in terms of getting jobs, in terms of other socio-economic challenges. So this is a concern of human rights also. There are also another lens of displacement migration. This is gender-based lens. The migrants, when they come to the urban slums, they try to get job in the informal sectors, and in the informal sectors, jobs are not easy, and jobs are very difficult from the women and for the women, and very often they are deprived from their wages. They also suffer from many kinds of violation, sexual harassment, and also chance of trafficking. But if we look into the national policy discourses, we don't have proper legal instrument for supporting those climate change-induced migrants. And because this issue has been translated from international discourses, and still we consider that climate change, displacement and migration is an international issue, is an issue of UNFCCC. So UNFCCC should identify proper measures or to undertake proper legal instrument to address those displacement and migration issues. But if I look into the global instrument, there is not enough discussion in regards to displacement and migration. Once there was certain discussion under adaptation framework, you know about Cancun adaptation framework, there is a particular paragraph on displacement and migration. After that, this has been included to the loss and damage, and we lost the loss and damage negotiation. And right now, many different issues are coming up, right? Like Nansen Initiative, Global Platform on Displacement and Migration, but none of them are really concerned about the climate change-induced displacement and migration. They talk about internal displacement and migration, but climate change-induced displacement and migration is not only internal displacement. This also has some cross-border implications, and we implemented the study in some South Asian countries, and we find that cross-border migration are increasing, and this is due to impacts of climate change. So my concern is that in the global instrument, there is no proper discussion. And right now, there is a discussion that whether we could tag into or align this issue to the human rights-based issues or framework. Again, human rights are entirely depends on the country perspective and country's laws and regulation, whether they will support this climate change induced migrants or not. So what I am trying to figure out that displacement and migration is increasing. They're facing violation of human rights. They are not getting access to the public resources, entitlements, and nobody is really concerned about this. Neither the national instrument, legal instrument, nor the international legal instrument. So I think we should take some lessons from the regional initiative and also should take this concern to the global level so that we can influence the global policy stakeholders to develop a kind of policy framework, particularly for the climate change induced displacement migrants. I would like to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Doha. So we are having a fight against time. We would have liked to have this conversation longer, but we also have another session in the Global Youth Forum that's coming up. So Steni's trying to manage all the hosting. So going to the next or the last 7 minutes of this conversation. So if people have comments, please do add those into the chat box, and we can take this forward potentially within the Global Youth Forum discussions, and that would be something important. And as a question to all the panelists, until then, I would ask if you could answer in 1 minute, please. What is the most important and short-term urgent action that we need to take to address climate-induced human mobility? So I'll start with Rangita and pass to others. So please keep it to 1 minute. Thank you.
Okay, hi. So when it comes to urgent modes action, I believe that it's basically we have to create more awareness on people and then their understanding on climate change, because when it comes to Sri Lanka, I'm just taking a country context right now, people are not aware like why their soil is like, degraded, or maybe even their crops, even if they get proper crops, it's lacking nutrition. What is the reason for that? Probably I had been having water in my well like for so long, but then today I suddenly find out that it's not working properly. So what are these things? I mean, what really makes us to suffer in this way? So people are not really understanding what is meant by climate migration, or maybe climate change, first and foremost climate change. Then those sorts of impacts would actually will lead us to migrate from one place to the other. So I think the best thing is to provide some awareness to people as the urgent most action. That's it. Over to you, Vasta.
Thank you, Rangita. I'll quickly pass the mic to Sunny. If you can say in 1 minute what you think is most important, and if you want to add anything on the pastoral communities as well, relating to the question that was previously asked. And I would like to request others to quickly mute your mic so we could hear Sunny.
Yes, thank you. So here is like the kind of displacement. I think we still have some regulation in terms of displacement, because to avoid the conflict between pastoral communities and farmers, there is a kind of issue or regulation that people try to implement here. So for me, is to see is in terms of public policies also, is how can we have like a strong and good public policy that can be owned by several communities like the pastoral and the farmer also, and also in terms of with this one, if we have like this kind of policies that can be accepted by all the communities, that for me that can be a good step in terms of promoting peaceful living together with other communities, and have the right, because the migration is a kind of said someone, is a human right also issue. So how we can guarantee all these human rights for these communities also. So for me, it's very important. to analyze the kind of regulation that we have and transform them as like a kind of a strong and powerful public policy accepted by all. Yeah.
Thank you, Sunny. Sorry, I was muted. Chibizi, would you like to make your 1-minute intervention?
Yeah, thank you, Wasita, once again. So in terms of immediate actions, one of the things I propose is that some interventions will require immediate effort, some medium term, others to long term. But in terms of quick action, I will propose that given the fact that most Ghanaians are here, about 60 to 70% are farmers, and I'm sure this is also applicable across Africa. One of the things we can look at is to provide some mechanisms, particularly for the farmers, so they can also have some reliable source of water for their farm. So through the use of solar or any mechanism, but at least to guarantee water supply for their produce. I think that will be one of the critical steps we can take now to address migration. The second step we can also consider is to deal with the issue of deforestation, which also affects the rainfall pattern. So whilst we deal with deforestation, we should also encourage more tree planting because we need the trees to grow so it can also guarantee rains, which is needed, by our farmers. So for me, those are the two key quick interventions I believe we can take up in addressing climate-induced migration. Thank you.
Thank you, Chibizi. Doha, your 1-minute comment.
Yes. Yes, thank you. In fact, if I consider country-level intervention, we need to develop a kind of strategy and some actions how we could support the climate vulnerable communities to stop migration. I mean, climate adaptive livelihoods technologies or climate resilience practices. On the other hand, we also need to create pressure to the, a kind of influence to the national policy stakeholders and also international policy stakeholders. Based on some evidence-based research work, how climate change is affecting or provoking migration, so that the policymakers are sensitive for developing a kind of global policy or international policy to address those crises. And for this reason, we need a stronger network and also connectivity to create pressure. Thank you.
Thank you, Doha. And I'm really sorry that we couldn't take this conversation long. I think there's a lot of interest and that we have great panelists who would be able to contribute. So I would like to request everyone to write to us on info@slycantrust.org if you have any questions. If you would like to connect with us, share any information on the topic. If you would like to do some similar work in your countries, do write to us. And then also, Dennis, I'm not going to get back to you to speak because we have to run into the other session. But Dennis, if you could share the link to the new publication, do have a look. And if you think your country might benefit from something like this, a stakeholder consultation to come up with the information note to identify the needs and also the stakeholder actions that are needed, do write to us again, wasita@slycantrust.org or dennis@slycantrust.org or info@slycantrust.org. So thank you very much. And a big thank you to all our panelists and to all the people who are joining the Youth Forum. Senashia could potentially put the link here. We are moving to the next session, opening session of the Global Youth Forum for today, independently from this session. So thank you and bye for now. I'll join you in 2 minutes in that session. And thank you to the speakers.
Bye, and thank you, Wasita. Another
Thank you,
panelist.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
Very
you.
good.
Merci
Bye.
beaucoup.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much.